Hey guys, tonight we're heading back in time to the quiet corners of the Renaissance, where astronomers weren't the loud, dramatic figures we might imagine, but rather quiet, methodical souls peering through lenses at the vast unknown. They spent their nights in solitude, mapping the stars, challenging old ideas, and quietly rewriting the cosmos. Now you probably won't survive this, at least not the way they did, under flickering candlelight, dealing with long hours of observation and no Instagram to show off their work. But it's a story worth hearing, one that's sure to make you appreciate how much effort it took to figure out a few things about the universe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to share where you're from and what time it is when you're listening. It's always nice to know where my listeners are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Renaissance wasn't just about rebirth, it was a time of quiet revolution, and no revolution was as serene as that of the astronomers. These thinkers didn't just stumble into the revolution that changed the way we see the stars. They took a steady, almost meditative approach. Imagine them, day after day, working with only a handful of tools, relying on patience more than technology. They didn't have telescopes as sophisticated as the ones we know today. Instead, they relied on simpler, handcrafted instruments that took hours, sometimes days, to perfect. But even with these basic tools, they made discoveries that still shape our understanding of the cosmos today. Galileo, for example, was not the man in the public spotlight that we often think of. Instead, he spent countless hours hunched over his telescope, staring at the night sky with a kind of quiet obsession. It wasn't glamorous and it certainly wasn't quick. Their work was slow, methodical, like the rhythm of a metronome. These were the men who stared at the universe for hours on end, wondering, questioning, pondering. Yet, their lives were often quiet and secluded, overshadowed by the towering figures of the church and the universities. The Renaissance was a time of scientific curiosity, but it was also a time of cautious, patient advancement. If you were a Renaissance astronomer, you likely spent your days in isolation, facing the stars and questioning everything you knew. Your work, while groundbreaking, didn't immediately lead to fame or glory. Instead, it led to more questions, more observations, and more long nights spent grappling with the unknown. Historians still argue whether the slow pace of their discoveries was a reflection of their tools, their social restrictions, or simply the times in which they lived. But one thing is clear: their quiet lives and tireless work laid the foundations for the very stars we look at today. And in their peaceful solitude, they changed the course of history. As you drift deeper into this journey through the Renaissance, imagine yourself in the shoes of a Renaissance astronomer, staring up at the stars with only your naked eye or, if you were lucky, a simple device like an astrolabe or a quadrant. These tools weren't flashy. No big telescope with high-powered lenses like we have today. The kind of instruments they worked with were much more humble, the mechanical equivalent of a wooden toy rather than the sleek, advanced equipment of modern science. But despite their simplicity, they did the job. In a way, these astronomers were like ancient engineers crafting their own solutions, each tool a bridge to the unknown. Now, take a deep breath and picture yourself in one of these observatories, an old stone room with windows opening out into the quiet night. You might feel the chill in the air, the smell of parchment and ink mixing with the faint scent of the earth outside. The instruments before you look crude compared to what we're used to today, but every careful calculation you make is like a step in the dark, each one revealing a new piece of the cosmos. For astronomers like Copernicus, who spent years observing the night sky without the help of a telescope, their biggest breakthroughs often came from hours upon hours of painstaking observation. They relied heavily on the naked eye, charting stars and planets with incredible accuracy. Yet, the most revolutionary aspects of their work didn't lie in their tools but rather in their persistence, their unwillingness to simply accept what they were told by others. No, the stars wouldn't simply fall into place. It took a quiet rebellion of sorts to get them to realize that the Earth wasn't at the center of it all. Historians still argue whether Copernicus' heliocentric theory would have ever taken off if it weren't for the quiet dedication of men like Galileo, whose use of the first telescopes was revolutionary in proving Copernicus' radical ideas. Galileo didn't invent the telescope, but he sure knew how to use it, and he wasn't just looking at the moon and stars. He was looking at the very fabric of the universe, slowly peeling back its layers. Through this quiet tool, he was able to make discoveries that would forever change how humanity understood the cosmos. Yet, for all his discoveries, Galileo remained, in some sense, a quiet figure, revolutionary yes, but also cautious and isolated in his work. The simplicity of their tools, often made with nothing more than a careful hand and a keen eye, was at once their greatest limitation and their greatest strength. With such rudimentary instruments, the Renaissance astronomers had to rely on patience and precision. A small error could throw off months or even years of work. Yet, it was this dedication to accuracy, this willingness to observe and reobserve, that allowed them to build the framework for future scientists to follow. In their hands, these humble tools became instruments of profound discovery, proving that sometimes, it's not about the complexity of the machine, but the clarity of the mind using it. Their work wasn't just about looking at the stars, it was about developing a system to understand the heavens. Even with their limited resources, these men laid the foundation for modern astronomy. Historians often ask if their discoveries would have come faster if they had better tools, but the truth is that their dedication to their craft, the quiet hours spent recording data, making calculations, and staring up at the heavens, allowed them to make discoveries that had been waiting to be found just out of sight. It wasn't the technology they had that changed the world, but rather their determination to make sense of what they could see. Now, let's shift our gaze to the man who started to shake things up, Copernicus. You know, it's hard to imagine the world before his work. Back then, everyone believed the Earth was the center of the universe. It was a comforting idea, wasn't it? You probably wouldn't want to be told that the whole universe didn't revolve around you. But Copernicus, sitting there in his quiet study, poring over his calculations, mapping out the stars, came to the conclusion that maybe, just maybe, we weren't at the center of it all. Instead, the sun, that big warm ball of light in the sky, was the true center of our universe. Imagine how audacious that must have sounded to the people of his time. The very thought would have been sacrilege. He wasn't a revolutionary in the sense of a loud, protest-driven figure. No, Copernicus quietly observed, and through years of painstaking work, he deduced that the Earth was just another planet, orbiting the sun like the others. The quiet brilliance of his theory was that it wasn't an angry revolt against old ideas. It was a quiet understanding that the universe was much more expansive than anyone could have imagined. Copernicus wasn't trying to upset the apple cart, he was simply putting the universe into perspective. Historians still argue whether his heliocentric model would have ever been accepted if it hadn't been for the work of Galileo, who came much later with his revolutionary telescope. But Copernicus' ideas were radical. He had a deep understanding of the sky, and his observations were so meticulous that they were later confirmed by Galileo's improved technology. Still, Copernicus didn't get the instant recognition he deserved. His work remained largely unpublished until after his death, hiding in the shadows of his quiet life. Imagine being a quiet observer like Copernicus, spending years refining your theories in isolation, only to have them ignored, sometimes even ridiculed, by those who still clung to the old ways. Yet, his theories sparked something, a quiet revolution of the mind. Copernicus didn't have to go out and shout. He simply observed the natural world and dared to challenge the consensus. And in doing so, he shifted the way humanity saw the cosmos forever. His ideas gave birth to an entirely new way of thinking about the universe, a way that was free from the constraints of human ego and accepted authority. The quiet nature of his life, the long hours of solitary study, the patience required to observe the motions of the heavens, was mirrored in his approach to his work. It's strange, isn't it? To think that the most radical idea of the Renaissance, the one that upended the entire worldview, was developed in such calm seclusion. But that was the brilliance of Copernicus. He didn't need a dramatic unveiling. All he needed was his mind and his tools, and with those he redefined the universe. Historians often wonder if the Church would have ever accepted Copernicus' theory had it been presented at a different time. Would the silence of the astronomers have been louder if they had been able to speak freely? Would the acceptance of the heliocentric model have been quicker if Copernicus had lived to see Galileo's discoveries? One thing's for sure, it took time. And in that time, it took patience. Patience that not just Copernicus but many Renaissance astronomers would need in order to push humanity towards a new understanding of the cosmos. Now let's move on to another quiet giant of the Renaissance, Galileo Galilei. If Copernicus was the quiet pioneer, Galileo was the reluctant rebel. He didn't just sit in his study and wonder if the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, he went out and proved it. But in his case, it wasn't an angry protest or an outburst of passion. It was a quiet revolution, one that started with the simple act of looking through a telescope. Picture this. You're Galileo sitting in your little workshop and you've just crafted your own telescope. It's not much by modern standards, just a few lenses and a lot of trial and error. But with this humble tool, you aim it at the heavens and you see something that will change everything. Jupiter. Not just a dot in the sky but a planet with moons of its own orbiting it. The universe, you realize, is far more complex than anyone ever imagined. And that's when the quiet revolution begins. Galileo didn't invent the telescope, but he sure did know how to use it. He used his homemade instruments to observe the moon, the stars, the phases of Venus, and, most importantly, the moons of Jupiter. Imagine the thrill, the quiet excitement of seeing something no one had ever seen before. In those moments, Galileo wasn't just making discoveries. He was rewriting the book on the universe. Yet, for all his brilliance, Galileo's life was not one of fame and adoration. No, he was a man at odds with the world, a quiet figure who was forced to defend his ideas against a system that wasn't ready for them. Historians still argue about Galileo's trial before the Inquisition. Was he a martyr for science, or did he bring trouble upon himself by not being more diplomatic? Either way, Galileo's work and his quiet rebellion changed everything. He had seen things that no one had seen before, and now he was showing the world what he had discovered. But in a time when science and religion were deeply intertwined, Galileo's discoveries were not just scientific. They were controversial. To challenge the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe wasn't just an intellectual matter. It was a matter of faith, of the very structure of the world. Galileo's quiet observations were shaking the foundations of a centuries-old belief system, and the establishment was not amused. Despite the backlash, Galileo persisted. His discoveries didn't just stay in his little workshop. They made their way across Europe, spreading the idea that the Earth wasn't at the center of the universe. Galileo wasn't just a quiet observer. He was also a loud advocate for the truth, using his findings to challenge the world's accepted views. His life, though filled with quiet moments of study, was also filled with loud confrontations, especially with the Catholic Church. And yet, through it all, his quiet work continued. It was this balance of silence and rebellion that made Galileo one of the most important figures in the history of science. Historians still debate the exact impact of Galileo's trial. Did it slow down the acceptance of heliocentrism, or did it just give it more publicity? One thing is certain. His ideas didn't die in that courtroom. They lived on, whispered and passed around, until the world was ready to embrace them. Galileo wasn't a man of loud protests. He was a man of quiet revolution, and in that silence he changed the way we view the cosmos forever. Now let's pause and turn our attention to Tycho Brahe, an astronomer who, in many ways, epitomizes the strange quietness of Renaissance science. Tycho was no Copernicus, content to quietly observe and theorize from his study, nor was he a Galileo, actively challenging the very foundation of the universe. No, Tycho Brahe had a very different approach. He was a man of excess, a man who lived a strange life full of oddities and peculiarities, Yet his contribution to astronomy was just as quietly profound. Picture him for a moment, a towering figure larger than life in more ways than one. He wasn't just an astronomer, he was a nobleman with a flair for the dramatic. Tycho didn't just use the tools of the time. He built his own observatory, which became one of the most advanced of its kind in Europe. Imagine standing next to Tycho in his observatory, with massive instruments stretching up towards the sky, ready to track the stars. His observatory, named Uraniborg, was a strange hybrid, part scientific workshop, part royal palace, and part eccentric hideaway. It was a place where Tycho could retreat into his world of meticulous observation. But it wasn't just the grandeur of his observatory that made Tycho's work so remarkable, it was the precision of his observations. Unlike many of his contemporaries who were working with far more rudimentary instruments, Tycho's tools were built for accuracy. His work was a labor of love, his calculations painstakingly detailed, as he meticulously recorded the movements of the planets and stars. And yet, for all his work, Tycho didn't have the luxury of public acclaim. His observations were often overshadowed by others, even though he had arguably laid the groundwork for future breakthroughs in astronomy. Tycho's life was a quiet struggle for recognition, even though he was deeply embedded in the world of European science. He worked under royal patronage, yet his eccentric personality sometimes alienated him from other scholars. Historians still argue whether Tycho's approach to science, his obsessive, almost obsessive-compulsive focus on detail, was what kept him out of the limelight, or if it was simply his personality. There was no grand confrontation, no public trial like Galileo, but there was an ongoing quiet battle for acceptance. It was as if the universe itself had a way of keeping him in the shadows, even though his work would eventually play a key role in the discoveries of later astronomers. Despite the quiet struggles he faced, Tycho's legacy lived on. His precise observations were later used by Johannes Kepler to develop the laws of planetary motion, laws that would forever alter our understanding of the solar system. Tycho Brahe may not have been the most celebrated of Renaissance astronomers, but his quiet precision helped shape the future of science. His life was a strange mix of public grandeur and personal isolation, yet in the end it was his careful observations, quietly recorded in his observatory, that would help turn the tide in the history of astronomy. Historians still debate whether Tycho's eccentricities were the result of his vast talent or if they were the product of his struggle to fit into the academic world. Was he simply too far ahead of his time, or did his stubborn personality prevent him from gaining the recognition he deserved? Regardless of the answer, Tycho Brahe's contributions to the field of astronomy were undeniable, and without his precise work, the stars would remain just as distant, unknown, and mysterious as they were before his eyes. Now, let's step back and take a look at the role of patronage in shaping the quiet lives of Renaissance astronomers. For these scholars, the path to progress wasn't always paved by fame or glory. It was paved by the wealthy and powerful who could afford to support their work. And while we may think of science as a purely intellectual endeavor, it was also an intensely social one, built on connections, patronage, and, quite frankly, survival. Many astronomers, like Copernicus and Tycho Brahe, found themselves in the unusual position of being reliant on the generosity of nobles and royal patrons to fund their research. Imagine this. You're an astronomer in the 16th century trying to chart the stars with only basic tools, working day and night. But you're not doing this from the comfort of your home. No, you're likely in an observatory built by your wealthy patron, a grand, almost castle-like structure designed to provide the perfect conditions for astronomical observations. But this support comes at a price. Your patron's influence, their expectations, and their interest in the project could shape your work more than you'd like to admit. These quiet, secluded spaces, built for the singular pursuit of knowledge, were often filled with a sense of both gratitude and tension. The astronomer's role wasn't just to seek the truth, it was to fulfill a service for those who held the purse strings. The most famous example of this patronage system is the relationship between Tycho Brahe and his royal benefactors. Brahe's observatory Uraniborg was funded by King Frederick II of Denmark, and it became a world-renowned hub of astronomical research. Yet for all the grandeur of the observatory, there was a deep sense of isolation in Brahe's life. While he was given the resources to pursue his work, he was still beholden to the whims of his patrons. His relationship with them wasn't always smooth, and he often found himself at odds with other scholars and royal figures. Despite his grand scientific achievements, his life was filled with quiet struggles for independence, as he was constantly navigating the delicate balance between loyalty to his patrons and his desire for scientific freedom. Meanwhile, Copernicus also benefited from the patronage system, though his story was less dramatic. Copernicus was supported by the Church, and he spent much of his career quietly studying in the comfort of his position as a canon at the Frauenburg Cathedral. He didn't have the grand observatories that Brahe enjoyed, but he had the time and space to pursue his groundbreaking ideas in relative peace. His work was privately funded, largely due to his status, and it wasn't until after his death that the true importance of his work began to be recognized. There's a certain irony to this quiet support. Copernicus, the man who would eventually change the course of history, worked in relative obscurity, funded by an institution that would later come to oppose his findings. Historians still argue about the role that patronage played in the development of Renaissance science. Would Copernicus have been able to pursue his heliocentric theory without the Church's support? Could Brahe have made his crucial observations without the financial backing of the Danish crown? It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer. Patronage was a double-edged sword. While it provided the resources necessary for scientific discovery, it also placed astronomers in a position where they had to navigate complex social dynamics, balancing their need for funding with their desire for independence. But one thing is certain. Without the support of these powerful figures, many of the Renaissance astronomers would not have been able to achieve the breakthroughs they did. The quiet, secluded nature of their work was made possible by those who believed in the importance of science, even if they couldn't fully understand or appreciate the discoveries being made. This quiet partnership between scholars and patrons was a delicate dance, one that was essential to the development of astronomy during the Renaissance. As we move further into the world of Renaissance astronomy, let's take a moment to imagine the observatories themselves. These quiet sanctuaries were where the work happened, often far removed from the bustling centers of power. Picture yourself stepping into one of these observatories. It's not like the flashy labs we have today with computer screens and blinking lights. Instead, it's a serene, almost monastic space. A large, open room with a handful of instruments scattered around. Some are massive, designed to measure the movements of the stars, while others are small and delicate, made by hand. The stone walls are cool to the touch, and there's a faint scent of parchment and oil in the air. These observatories weren't just places for scientific work. They were sacred spaces where the secrets of the universe were revealed slowly, methodically. The astronomers of the time treated these spaces with the utmost reverence. In many ways they were like modern-day monasteries for science, quiet, focused places of intense observation and thought. While the rest of the world was moving forward with the Renaissance's art, politics, and philosophy, these astronomers remained in the shadows, working in silence. For men like Tycho Brahe, these observatories were their life's work. Brahe's Uraniborg, located on a remote island in Denmark, was a place of incredible beauty and serenity. It was not just a functional observatory, it was an architectural marvel, built with the finest materials and equipped with some of the most advanced instruments of the time. Yet, despite its grandeur, the work done within its walls was done in near total isolation. Brahe spent years observing the stars in silence, recording his data meticulously. Uraniborg was not just a physical space, it was a space for the mind, a place where the quiet work of astronomy unfolded in the shadows of royal patronage and personal ambition. For others, like Galileo, the observatories were less grand but no less important. Galileo famously worked with a small homemade telescope, but his observations were as groundbreaking as any made with the grand instruments of the time. His observatories were often just his home or a small room, where he would sit for hours on end, peering through the lenses and making discoveries that would forever change the way humanity viewed the universe. His observatories weren't about luxury or size, they were about quiet dedication to the work, a deep connection between the observer and the universe. Historians still debate the role that observatories played in the advancement of Renaissance science. Was the isolation of these spaces a necessary condition for the breakthroughs made within them, or did the lack of collaboration slow the pace of progress? Some argue that the solitary nature of these observatories was essential to the astronomers' success. Free from the distractions and political pressures of the time, they could focus purely on their work. Others suggest that collaboration could have sped up discoveries, as many of these astronomers worked in isolation, unaware of what their counterparts were doing across Europe. But whether they were grand like Brahe's Uraniborg or modest like Galileo's personal setup, the observatories were crucial to the development of astronomy during the Renaissance. They were more than just places for scientific work. They were quiet sanctuaries where astronomers could gaze at the stars and begin to unlock the mysteries of the universe. And despite their seclusion, the discoveries made within these walls would eventually change the world, all thanks to the patience, perseverance, and quiet focus of those who built and worked within them. Now, let's take a step back and imagine the daily lives of these Renaissance astronomers. It's easy to think of them as distant figures, isolated in their observatories or hidden away in dark studies, only coming to life in the moments when they made groundbreaking discoveries. But the reality of their lives was much more subtle, much quieter than that. Their days were long, filled with endless hours of observation and calculation, often in solitude. And while their nights were dedicated to the heavens, their days were spent in the quiet repetition of data recording, refining their work, and sometimes engaging in the politics of the scientific community. Think about it. You're Galileo, waking up before the sun has even risen, knowing that your day will be filled with studying and observing the sky. You have no modern conveniences, no electricity, no fancy equipment. Your office is wherever you set up your telescope, perhaps in a small room with a window, or even outside on a cold stone courtyard. As you sit down with your notes, you're not just recording numbers, you're writing the very language of the universe. The stars are not just dots in the sky to you, they are puzzles, each one a piece of a greater cosmic mystery that you're determined to solve. Your work doesn't come in bursts of inspiration but in patient, methodical hours of observation. This quiet, repetitive work wasn't just a matter of gathering data. It was about precision, about refining your theories until they fit the data just right. These astronomers didn't have the luxury of the digital tools we take for granted today. Their calculations were done by hand, often on large pieces of parchment, and their observations were made with crude, handmade instruments. Yet, despite the limitations, they made astonishing progress. Historians still debate how much of the astronomers' work during the Renaissance was inspired by the slow and steady rhythm of their daily lives, versus the sudden bursts of insight that sometimes occurred when they least expected it. Was it the sheer repetition and dedication to the task that allowed them to make their groundbreaking discoveries? Or was it the quiet moments of reflection that sparked their greatest insights? One thing is certain, their work was not about speed or flashiness. It was about patience, focus, and a steady dedication to the task at hand. At times, these astronomers could be seen as solitary figures, but their work was hardly an act of isolation in the modern sense. While they were often physically separated from the rest of society, working alone in their observatories or homes, their discoveries had far-reaching effects. They were quietly building a body of knowledge that would eventually connect with others in the scientific community. Their research was shared, discussed, and built upon by others across Europe. Slowly, their ideas gained traction, and eventually, the work that they'd quietly done would lay the groundwork for a new era of scientific understanding. Their daily lives may have been long and filled with solitude, but their work would eventually come to define the very course of human understanding. The quiet rhythms of their existence, day after day, hour after hour, helped build the foundation for the vast body of knowledge that would emerge in the centuries to come. Through their meticulous work, their days spent observing and calculating, they reshaped the way humanity would view the cosmos. As we continue to walk through the quiet, secluded world of the Renaissance astronomers, we cannot overlook the delicate relationship between science and religion. The Renaissance was a time of great intellectual upheaval, but it was also a time when the Church held significant power, especially in matters of science. For many of the astronomers we've discussed, their discoveries didn't just challenge existing scientific ideas, they also challenged religious beliefs that had dominated for centuries. And yet, in a peculiar way, the Church itself was deeply involved in their work, often providing the resources and protection these scientists needed to pursue their studies. Imagine being Copernicus, quietly drafting your heliocentric theory in a cathedral library. You're working on a theory that, if fully accepted, will turn the Church's teachings on their head. But rather than being an outright enemy, the Church is actually a patron of your work. Copernicus, after all, was a priest and a canon, someone whose work was done within the framework of the Church's approval. His observations and theories were not meant to contradict the faith but to offer a new way of understanding the divine order of the universe. In many ways, his work was as much theological as it was scientific. He didn't see himself as undermining the Church. He saw himself as illuminating the divine structure of the cosmos. But, of course, not everyone saw it that way. As Copernicus' theory slowly gained attention, the potential conflict with the Church grew. His idea that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe seemed to undermine the very notion of humanity's central role in creation. This idea, if widely accepted, would raise uncomfortable questions about the place of humankind in the grand scheme of the universe, a universe that no longer revolved around us. Historians still argue whether the Church's early involvement in the work of Renaissance astronomers was more of a blessing or a curse. On the one hand, many astronomers, Copernicus included, benefited from the Church's patronage. But on the other hand, the Church's eventual condemnation of Galileo's work showed how fragile that relationship could be. Galileo's public endorsement of the heliocentric model, combined with his challenges to the geocentric view that had been endorsed by the Church for centuries, led to a bitter confrontation. Galileo found himself on trial, not for his observations, but for his refusal to recant his findings. His quiet rebellion, rooted in his observations of the stars, led to a public trial that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Despite the tension between science and religion, the two were not always at odds. In fact, many astronomers believed that their work was not in opposition to God's will but rather a means of uncovering the divine order of the universe. They saw themselves as uncovering the hidden patterns of creation, not as rejecting the teachings of the Church. Copernicus, Galileo, and even Tycho Brahe believed that the universe was a reflection of God's greatness, and by studying it, they were only seeking to understand his work better. The Renaissance was a time of deep intellectual transformation, but it was also a time of quiet, often unseen tension between the forces of faith and reason. For the astronomers, this tension was an inevitable part of their work. They didn't have the luxury of the separation between church and science that we often take for granted today. Their discoveries, no matter how revolutionary, were always subject to the lens of religious authority. And yet, in many ways, it was this very tension that drove their work, pushing them to think critically and challenge the boundaries of human understanding. In the end, the relationship between the Church and the astronomers of the Renaissance is a story of conflict, yes, but also of cooperation. Their quiet work, which sometimes strayed into controversial territory, ultimately paved the way for a new understanding of the cosmos, a cosmos that wasn't centered on Earth but on the stars themselves. It was a quiet, revolutionary shift that would echo through the centuries. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the art of Renaissance astronomy. Yes, astronomy wasn't just about observation, data, and mathematical calculations. It was also a form of art, one that blended the practical with the imaginative. Think of the star charts, the intricate sketches of planetary movements, and the hand-drawn diagrams of celestial bodies that adorned the pages of astronomical texts. These astronomers were not only scientists, they were also artists, and their work was as much about capturing the beauty of the universe as it was about understanding its mechanics. Imagine yourself in the workshop of an astronomer, sitting at a sturdy wooden desk, quill in hand. The faint glow of candlelight flickers on the parchment as you carefully draw the stars. Your hand moves with precision, capturing not only the positions of the celestial bodies but also the essence of what you see. Every curve, every line is calculated, and yet, there is an undeniable sense of artistry in the way you recreate the cosmos on paper. The star charts you create are not just scientific tools, they are works of art, reflecting your understanding of the universe and the order that governs it. Take for example the work of Johannes Kepler, whose laws of planetary motion reshaped our understanding of the solar system. Kepler wasn't just a scientist. He was a meticulous observer who recorded his findings with artistic precision. His planetary diagrams, while scientifically significant, also held an aesthetic quality. There was a beauty in the way the planets moved through the heavens, and Kepler's diagrams sought to capture that beauty in a way that was both mathematically precise and visually appealing. Historians still debate the role of art in early scientific work. Was it simply a tool for recording observations, or did it serve a deeper purpose? One that helped astronomers connect with the universe in a more personal way? The artists of the Renaissance were not just painters and sculptors. They were also astronomers who used their craft to make sense of the stars. By blending art and science, these astronomers created a visual language for understanding the cosmos, one that was accessible to both scholars and laypeople alike. The importance of these drawings and charts cannot be overstated. Without them, much of the progress in astronomy during the Renaissance would have been lost to history. These visual records allowed future astronomers to build upon the work of their predecessors. Tycho Brahe's detailed star charts, for example, were used by Kepler to develop his laws of planetary motion. And Galileo's drawings of the moon, with its craters and mountains, opened up new ways of seeing our lunar neighbor. These images were not mere representations. They were invitations to explore the cosmos, to see the universe as it truly was. Even today, these early astronomical illustrations still captivate us. There's something deeply moving about seeing the stars and planets through the eyes of these Renaissance astronomers. Their drawings were not just scientific tools, they were windows into their minds, offering us a glimpse of how they saw the world around them. And while they may seem rudimentary compared to modern photographs of the stars, there's a timeless beauty in their simplicity, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is as much about the journey as it is about the destination. Historians continue to be fascinated by the intersection of art and science in the Renaissance. It wasn't just that astronomers had to be skilled in mathematics and observation. They also had to possess an artistic sensibility, a deep appreciation for the beauty of the universe. In their hands, science became a form of art, one that sought to capture the sublime nature of the cosmos while also uncovering its deepest secrets. And in doing so, they created a lasting legacy, one that continues to inspire scientists and artists alike to this day. Now that we've touched on the artistic side of Renaissance astronomy, let's delve into the mathematical elegance that defined the work of these astronomers. It's easy to picture these scientists as lone figures, peering through telescopes or drawing star charts by candlelight, but in truth, their work was grounded in the abstract language of mathematics. While their instruments were often simple, the theories they developed were anything but. To these Renaissance minds, the universe wasn't just a collection of stars and planets. It was an intricate system that could be described, understood, and predicted through numbers and geometry. Let's take a step back in time and imagine a young Johannes Kepler, sitting at his desk, surrounded by astronomical data and charts. His task? To understand the motion of the planets. He's been working for years, poring over Tycho Brahe's meticulously recorded observations, trying to find patterns that could unlock the mysteries of planetary orbits. Unlike Copernicus, who proposed a heliocentric model, Kepler's task was more mathematical. He sought the laws that govern the planet's movements. Kepler's genius was in his ability to take the raw data, those precise observations made by Tycho, and translate them into the universal laws that we know today. Through painstaking calculations, Kepler discovered that the planets didn't move in perfect circles as was traditionally believed, but in elliptical orbits. This was a revelation that changed the entire course of astronomy. His 3 laws of planetary motion not only reshaped our understanding of the solar system but also laid the groundwork for Newton's laws of gravity centuries later. But Kepler's work wasn't just about numbers. It was about finding harmony and beauty in the cosmic dance. His calculations, while exact, were guided by his belief that the universe operated on a divine, orderly system. He saw his work as uncovering God's grand design, and this belief gave him the persistence to continue his studies, even when others doubted his conclusions. Kepler wasn't just calculating planetary orbits. He was engaging in a search for the underlying structure of the cosmos, a search that would ultimately reveal the profound interconnectedness of the universe. Historians still marvel at the audacity of Kepler's theories. To challenge centuries of belief about the perfect circular orbits of the planets was no small feat, and yet, he did so with a quiet confidence, relying on the data he had collected and the mathematics he had mastered. Kepler's work demonstrated that the universe was not as simple as the ancient Greeks had imagined, and that our understanding of the heavens had to be grounded in observation and mathematical precision. Kepler's laws also had profound implications beyond astronomy. They helped to shift the intellectual climate of the time, leading to a broader acceptance of the idea that natural phenomena could be understood and predicted through reason and mathematics. This was a far cry from the mystical, philosophical approaches to science that had dominated for centuries. Kepler's approach was the beginning of a new era, one in which science would rely on empirical data, logic, and mathematical reasoning. While Kepler's work was groundbreaking, it was also quiet. He didn't storm the world with his findings. Instead, his ideas spread slowly, gradually gaining acceptance among other astronomers. It wasn't until later, when Isaac Newton came along and integrated Kepler's laws into his theory of gravity, that Kepler's work gained the recognition it truly deserved. But even in his own time, Kepler's work was profound, quietly laying the foundation for the scientific revolution that would follow. Historians continue to debate the extent of Kepler's influence on the later development of physics and astronomy. Was he the first to truly understand the laws of motion, or did his work serve as a bridge between earlier theories and later discoveries? Either way, Kepler's mathematical genius was key to unlocking the secrets of the universe, and his quiet, methodical approach to science set the tone for the astronomers who followed. As we reflect on the work of these Renaissance astronomers, we must also acknowledge the quiet controversies that surrounded their discoveries. For all the profound contributions they made to science, their work was not always met with immediate acceptance. In fact, many of these astronomers faced criticism, ridicule, and even persecution for the ideas they championed. Yet, their quiet determination, their refusal to abandon their beliefs in the face of overwhelming opposition, is part of what makes their legacy so powerful. One of the most striking examples of this quiet controversy is the case of Galileo. After making his groundbreaking discoveries with the telescope, observing the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the rugged surface of the moon, Galileo became a strong advocate for the heliocentric model of the solar system, which placed the sun at the center rather than the Earth. His findings, which supported Copernicus' theory, put him squarely at odds with the Catholic Church, which had long endorsed the geocentric model of the universe. But Galileo's conflict with the Church wasn't just about science. It was about authority. The Church, which held immense power at the time, saw Galileo's ideas as a direct challenge to its teachings. In the eyes of the Church, Galileo's work threatened the very foundation of its authority, both in religious matters and in intellectual life. It wasn't just the science of it that bothered them, it was the implicit challenge to the Church's control over what was considered truth. And so, Galileo was summoned to stand trial before the Inquisition, where he was forced to recant his findings, under the threat of excommunication. What's fascinating though is how Galileo's trial played out. While he was forced to recant publicly, his scientific ideas never truly faded. In fact, they only gained more traction in the years that followed. Galileo's quiet rebellion, his steadfast refusal to abandon his observations, became a symbol of scientific perseverance. Even though he was condemned by the Church, his discoveries went on to influence generations of scientists, from Kepler to Newton. His work, once silenced, eventually became the foundation of modern physics and astronomy. Historians still debate the significance of Galileo's trial. Did the Church's persecution of him slow the acceptance of the heliocentric model? Did it prevent other scientists from speaking out? Some argue that the Church's resistance to Galileo's ideas delayed the progress of science for centuries. Others suggest that Galileo's trial only served to highlight the power of science to challenge established authority. Whatever the case, the story of Galileo's quiet defiance is a testament to the power of truth, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. But Galileo's was not the only voice to be silenced. Throughout the Renaissance, there were other astronomers, particularly women and non-Europeans, whose contributions to the field were overlooked or suppressed. For example, the work of women like Maria Cunitz, who published a significant astronomical text in the 17th century, was often ignored or dismissed. Likewise, astronomers in the Islamic world, such as al-Battani, made significant contributions to the field, but their work was often overshadowed by the more famous figures of Europe. Historians still struggle to fully recognize the contributions of these overlooked figures. How much further along might astronomy have been if the ideas of these underrepresented groups had been given the attention they deserved? While many of these contributions were quietly suppressed, they are now being rediscovered and revalued by modern historians. In fact, much of the work done by women and non-European astronomers is only now beginning to be understood for its true significance. The story of quiet controversies in Renaissance astronomy is a story of resistance, of scholars who fought for their ideas, even when their voices were drowned out by powerful institutions. And while their battles may have been quiet, their impact was anything but. The work of these astronomers, both famous and overlooked, laid the foundation for the modern scientific world. Their contributions to the understanding of the universe continue to shape our view of the cosmos today. Historians continue to debate how much the controversies surrounding these figures slowed the progress of science. Could the acceptance of the heliocentric theory have happened earlier if not for the Church's opposition? Could other breakthroughs have been made sooner if scientists hadn't been silenced or sidelined? These questions may never have clear answers, but one thing is certain. The quiet defiance of these astronomers, their willingness to stand up for the truth, no matter the cost, is what has allowed us to see the universe as we do today. As we draw nearer to the final stretch of this journey, it's worth considering the slow, quiet spread of astronomical knowledge during the Renaissance. While we may think of the Renaissance as a time of rapid change, with discoveries and ideas spreading quickly through Europe, the reality was much slower than we'd like to imagine. The dissemination of astronomical knowledge, especially new ideas that challenged the old order, was a gradual process, one that took decades, sometimes centuries, to gain widespread acceptance. And the scholars who contributed to this knowledge often worked in isolation, with their ideas taking root in small circles before eventually reaching the broader academic community. Imagine once again being Galileo, sitting alone in your room staring through your telescope at Jupiter and its moons. The thrill of discovery must have been incredible, but the isolation was perhaps just as profound. You didn't have the instant communication we take for granted today. There were no emails or phone calls to spread the news of your findings. Instead, your work had to be painstakingly written out and shared with a select few. The exchange of ideas was slow, often taking years to make its way from one scholar to another. The pace of knowledge spread in much the same way that light travels through space, slowly, steadily, and often imperceptibly. For Copernicus, his heliocentric theory wasn't widely accepted until after his death. Even when he had completed his work and shared it with others, the reception was lukewarm at best. The scientific community was slow to adopt his ideas, and the church even slower. The truth is that Copernicus' groundbreaking work didn't truly gain momentum until it was taken up by other astronomers, particularly Galileo and Kepler. It was only when these later figures built on his work and made their own discoveries that the heliocentric model became accepted, though even then, it was met with resistance and debate. The spread of astronomical knowledge during the Renaissance was not an instant phenomenon. It was a quiet, incremental process, one that took time and patience. Tycho Brahe's meticulous star charts were used by Kepler, and Galileo's observations with his telescope were gradually incorporated into the body of knowledge that would eventually change how we view the universe. But these discoveries didn't just happen overnight. They were part of a slow, deliberate process that spanned generations. Historians still debate how the exchange of scientific ideas could have been sped up during the Renaissance. Could the rise of printing presses and the growing network of scholarly correspondence have helped ideas spread more quickly? Or was the pace of progress simply dictated by the nature of the time? One thing is certain. Despite the slow pace, the knowledge that emerged from this period eventually revolutionized our understanding of the cosmos. And it did so not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, steady accumulation of discoveries. As we think about the Renaissance astronomers, it's important to recognize how patient they had to be. They didn't get the instant gratification of immediate recognition. Instead, they worked for years, sometimes decades, in relative obscurity, laying the groundwork for future breakthroughs. Their ideas didn't spread like wildfire, they spread like the stars themselves over time, slowly gathering light. And that light, once it reached a critical mass, illuminated the universe in ways that would never be undone. Their work, quiet and methodical, was a testament to the power of patience. The Renaissance astronomers didn't need fame or instant recognition. They just needed time, dedication, and the quiet confidence that their work would eventually be understood. It was this quiet persistence that allowed them to lay the foundations of modern astronomy, and their legacy is a reminder that even the greatest discoveries can take time to be fully appreciated. As we near the end of this journey, it's time to reflect on the profound impact that Renaissance astronomy had on future generations. While the astronomers of the time didn't know it, the quiet work they were doing laid the foundation for the scientific revolution that would transform our understanding of the universe. Their discoveries didn't just change how people saw the stars, they changed the way people thought about science itself. And though they worked in relative isolation, their ideas would eventually ripple outwards, influencing generations of scientists, philosophers, and thinkers who would build on their work in ways they couldn't have imagined. Think about it. You're Galileo looking at Jupiter's moons for the first time. In that moment, you're not just observing a new celestial body, you're setting the stage for future explorations of space. Your discoveries will go on to influence figures like Isaac Newton, whose laws of motion and universal gravitation would be built on the framework of Kepler's planetary motion laws. Galileo, Kepler, and the other astronomers of the Renaissance didn't just lay the groundwork for astronomy, they laid the groundwork for physics, for the scientific method, and for the way we approach the mysteries of the natural world. It's easy to think of the Renaissance as just a time of cultural flourishing, with great works of art and literature emerging from the period. But what's often overlooked is the way this intellectual explosion extended to science. The discoveries of the Renaissance astronomers were the beginning of a new way of thinking about the world. one that wasn't based on ancient dogma or religious authority, but on observation, evidence, and reason. This shift in thinking was slow, quiet, and sometimes controversial, but it was unstoppable. The astronomical discoveries made during the Renaissance set the stage for the Enlightenment and the modern scientific era. Think about how radically our understanding of the universe changed after the work of these quiet astronomers. The idea that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, that the planets moved in elliptical orbits, and that the cosmos could be understood through mathematics. These were ideas that would forever change humanity's place in the universe. It's no exaggeration to say that the Renaissance astronomers didn't just look at the stars, they redefined what it meant to understand the cosmos. Historians still debate the exact timeline of how Renaissance astronomy influenced the later stages of the scientific revolution. Was it the quiet work of Kepler and Galileo that led to the rapid advancements of Newton and others? Or was the scientific revolution inevitable, and the work of Renaissance astronomers just a precursor to something greater? Regardless of the debate, one thing is clear. The discoveries of these astronomers were the spark that ignited a much larger fire. Without their quiet contributions, the world of modern science would look very different today. Even in their own time, the astronomers of the Renaissance didn't fully realize the scope of their work. They were often working in isolation, their discoveries published in small circles or shared through private correspondence. And yet, their ideas eventually spread across Europe, influencing not just future scientists, but also the way people viewed the world. The quiet, methodical work of these men laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would change human history. Their impact is still felt today. When we look up at the stars, when we study the planets, or when we send probes into deep space, we're building on the foundations laid by these Renaissance astronomers. They may not have known it at the time, but their work transformed the way we see the universe, and, in doing so, changed the course of history. Their quiet contributions helped to open up new frontiers, and their legacy lives on in the very act of scientific exploration. As we come to the final moments of this journey, let's take a step back and reflect on the legacy of these Renaissance astronomers, whose quiet, persistent work continues to resonate today. Their discoveries, their theories, and their tireless dedication to understanding the universe laid the foundation for the modern scientific worldview we hold so firmly today. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of their work is not just the knowledge they imparted, but the manner in which they pursued it, quietly, relentlessly, and with a reverence for the unknown that is all too rare in our fast-paced world. These astronomers were not driven by fame, fortune, or immediate recognition. They weren't interested in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Instead, they worked quietly, often in isolation, knowing that their discoveries might not be fully appreciated until long after they were gone. They were like silent architects of the universe, building a framework of knowledge that would eventually transform humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. And while their work may have been controversial at times, their dedication to truth, to observation, and to reason was unwavering. Imagine for a moment the quiet satisfaction that these astronomers must have felt, sitting alone in their observatories, looking up at the night sky and knowing that they were seeing things that no one else had seen before. There was no immediate applause, no rushing crowds to congratulate them, only the vastness of the stars stretching out in front of them. And yet, despite this solitude, their work was shaping the future, paving the way for generations of scientists to come. The impact of their discoveries is still felt today. From the way we understand the orbits of planets to the methods we use to explore the stars, their legacy lives on in every telescope, every space probe, every discovery made in the search for knowledge beyond our planet. These Renaissance astronomers may not have known the extent of their influence, but their quiet work continues to inspire us to look up and ask questions. As we look back on their lives, their struggles, and their triumphs, it's impossible not to be struck by the calm, patient nature of their work. They didn't seek the spotlight. They didn't demand recognition. Instead, they let their work speak for itself, knowing that the answers they sought would come in time. And in that quiet pursuit of knowledge they changed the world. Historians continue to marvel at how these men, working in relative obscurity, transformed the way humanity views the universe. Their work laid the groundwork for centuries of scientific exploration, and their methods continue to guide us today. The Renaissance astronomers were the quiet pioneers of the scientific revolution, and their legacy lives on in every discovery, in every new frontier of knowledge that we continue to explore. So, as we close this chapter, let us remember the quiet persistence, the humble dedication, and the unwavering commitment to truth that defined these astronomers. They worked not for fame but for knowledge, and in doing so they forever changed the way we see the world and our place within it. Their story is a reminder that sometimes, the greatest discoveries are made in silence, and that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey that never truly ends. Now, as the quiet night settles in, take a moment to reflect on how these astronomers, far removed from the hustle and bustle of modern life, spent their days looking up at the stars, finding meaning in the vast expanse of the universe. And as you close your eyes, remember that the universe is still out there, quietly waiting for you to look up and discover what's beyond.